Have you ever paused to truly consider what the environment actually means? It's a word we toss around constantly, right? From climate change discussions to local conservation efforts. But its definition is far more intricate and, frankly, more surprising than you might imagine. Today, we're taking a deep dive into the very fabric of our environment. We're moving beyond just trees and oceans to explore the intricate blend of natural and man-made features that truly shape our world. Our mission is to help you cut through the noise, understand the surprising layers of what environment truly encompasses, and grasp the profound ways everything is interlinked. We're drawing from a wealth of expert sources here, and along the way, we'll connect it all to something as impactful as mining, showing how it interacts with every single one of these elements, influencing our planet, our societies, and, our economies too. Okay, let's unpack this then. When we talk about nature, as John Stuart Mill noted centuries ago, the word itself can be so entangled with different meanings, it often causes confusion. So for us today, in its broadest sense, what does environment really mean?
What's truly fascinating here is how the legal definition of environment in most places has dramatically expanded. It's gone way beyond just the physical and biological aspects we traditionally think of. It now critically includes social, cultural, and economic dimensions, effectively shifting the focus to the environment of people.
Wow. Okay, so it's not just the forests and the clean air, but also our communities, our economic systems, our shared history, our very way of life, all of it.
Exactly.
And this isn't some new radical idea either. You mentioned Mill even back then. Environment was apparently already an overworked word. So what are the deeper implications of taking this broader view?
Precisely. While the hard sciences usually categorize 4 natural environmental spheres, the atmosphere, hydrosphere, lithosphere, and biosphere, we humans have, in essence, constructed our human environment directly on top of and within these. We're constantly modifying conditions. And this raises a really fundamental question. Are humans somehow fundamentally separate from nature, or are we, in fact, integral participants within it?
That's a big question.
It really is. And you basically see 2 main schools of thought grappling with this. One argues that because of our culture and technology, humans are largely separated. This tends to lead to advocacy for strong protection and conservation, a perspective you often see in anti-mining movements, for example.
Okay, the separation view.
Then the other view sees humans as deeply integrated participants within ecosystems. This perspective guides more towards, let's say, sensible and sustainable use of resources. It's a view often adopted by governments and, many within the mining industry itself.
Interesting contrast.
But here's what's notable. Despite their differing approaches, what's really important is that both fundamentally agree on the absolute necessity of a deep respect for nature. That common ground often gets overlooked in the debates.
That distinction between separation and integration is quite profound, isn't it?
Yeah.
It really reframes how we might approach everything from policy to personal choices. Let's maybe dig into those foundational natural spheres then, starting with the air around us, the atmosphere. How does something as, impactful as a mining project interact with it, affecting it and being affected by it?
Mining operations are profoundly influenced by local climatic conditions, things like temperature, precipitation, wind. They're critical for everything from the initial design of a mine right through to its daily operations. Can it operate safely today? That kind of thing. But the reciprocal relationship is equally important, maybe even more so in terms of impact. Mining and mineral processing can significantly impact local and sometimes even regional air quality, and that directly affects human health and ecosystems.
How specifically? What are we talking about?
The most visible air pollutant from mining is usually particulate matter. Dust, basically. Now, while all dust is a concern, the really insidious particles are what we call PM2.5. These are particles less than 2.5 micrometers in diameter, tiny.
Tiny? Okay.
And because they're so small, they can travel vast distances, often carried by prevailing winds. And once inhaled, they penetrate deep into our respiratory systems, causing serious health issues.
That sounds serious.
It is. Consider the staggering statistic. Nobel laureate Paul Crutzen estimated that at least 3 million people die annually from diseases triggered just by air pollution.
3 million.
Wow. And if you want a really striking example, think about the Mount Isa lead smelter in Australia. Before it installed a desulfurization unit, this was around the year 2000, it produced this plume of SO2, sulfur dioxide. Depending on the winds, that plume could actually be detected 2,000 kilometers away in Perth.
2,000 kilometers.
Yeah.
From one smelter.
Exactly. That just shows you the kind of reach a supposedly local emission can truly have.
That's a truly sobering thought. Puts local emissions in a totally different perspective. And of course, those emissions, they originate from the land itself, right? The foundation of our world, the lithosphere. What's important to understand about the land's characteristics beyond just being where we dig for ores?
Right, the lithosphere, Earth's upper crust, is indeed where all ores are found. Understanding its geology, the history, the composition of its various rock types like igneous, metamorphic, sedimentary, and how soils form from them, that's absolutely fundamental for designing any mine. You have to know the ground you're working with.
Makes sense.
But equally critical are the landforms themselves. Think mountains, valleys, plains, and crucially, how people perceive those landforms. This is key. For you, the listener, it's important to consider how a landscape's fragility, or perhaps its cultural significance, impacts where facilities get placed. The goal is usually to minimize visual and emotional impact, because a mining engineer might see a perfectly practical site for a processing plant, while some environmentalists or local communities might see an irreplaceable natural or even spiritual landmark. It's about perspective.
That tension must be huge sometimes.
Oh, absolutely. Take coal mining in Germany as a really vivid example. To expand these enormous open-cast mines, entire villages are not just affected, they're literally relocated, gone.
Whole villages.
Whole villages. Imagine packing up generations of family history because a machine, like Note 293 giant bucket wheel excavator at the Hambach mine, is literally heading for your front door. This machine, it's the largest in the world, twice as long as a soccer field, as tall as a 30-story building.
That's hard to even picture.
That scale really underscores the profound, deeply personal impact on the land and the people living on it.
And then there's water, the hydrosphere. Obviously vital for all life, but also indispensable for mining operations, isn't it? How do we manage this increasingly finite resource amidst such competing demands?
Yeah, water's critical. It's in this continuous cycle, moving through various stores, atmosphere, oceans, rivers, groundwater. But its residence time, basically how long it stays in one place, varies hugely. We're talking mere days in the atmosphere and rivers, to hundreds or even thousands of years in large lakes, glaciers, and especially in deep groundwater aquifers.
Thousands of years.
Sometimes, yes. And some of this groundwater, known as fossil water, is effectively non-renewable on human timescales, meaning we're often extracting it far faster than nature can replenish it.
Which sounds like a problem.
It is. It raises an urgent question, really. With growing global populations and increased water use per person, unpolluted freshwater is becoming alarmingly scarce in many regions. So, naturally, mining activities, which can have pretty notable impacts on both water quantity and quality, have always generated intense controversy. It's a flashpoint.
I can see why.
The urgency of this issue was really starkly highlighted back in 1992 at the International Conference on Water and the Environment in Dublin. It established 4 crucial principles for water management. First, freshwater is finite and vulnerable. Second, management should be participatory and involve everyone. Third, women play a central, often overlooked, part in providing, managing, and safeguarding water. And finally, water has economic value. It's not just free.
Those seem like vital principles.
They are, and you see them playing out. Look at the Olympic Dam mine in South Australia, a massive copper producer. It initially began extracting groundwater from the Great Artesian Basin to support its operations, which caused concern. But in an effort to mitigate its water footprint and respond to those concerns, the company sponsored a program to help local pastoralists control their bore flows and pipe water more efficiently. And this initiative is actually estimated to eventually conserve almost as much water as the mine currently consumes.
So like a net zero water use goal, almost.
Something heading in that direction, yeah. It showcases a significant proactive approach to managing a shared vital resource.
It's a remarkable illustration. It shows innovation and collaboration can tackle these critical resource challenges.
Yeah.
Okay, moving from the physical and hydrological, let's talk about the biological, the biosphere. We constantly hear about biodiversity loss. How does that concept deeply connect to mining and, well, human activities in general?
Biodiversity. As formally defined by the UN Convention on Biological Diversity, it's essentially the variability among all living organisms. That includes everything from the genetic level within species to the incredible diversity of species themselves and the complex ecosystems they form. And it's unfortunately decreasing at an alarming rate, largely due to human impact.
And mining's role in that.
Mining, particularly when it occurs in remote areas, which often happen to be home to unique and fragile ecosystems, can fundamentally alter these environments, sometimes permanently. Tropical rainforests, for instance, they cover only about 7% of Earth's land surface, but they are incredible hotspots. They host up to 90% of all terrestrial species.
90%.
So mining in these biologically rich and frankly irreplaceable areas is understandably highly controversial.
But is mining the biggest culprit for something like rainforest loss?
That's where the broader context is important, and it's often less discussed. While mining is frequently singled out, globally, forest clearing for agriculture actually far outweighs all other activities combined as the main driver of rainforest loss.
Agriculture, really? More than logging or mining?
Significantly more, yes. Yet specific laws targeting mining can still create major friction. Look at Indonesia's Forestry Law number 41, which prohibited open-pit mining in protected forests. It was intensely contentious, not just because of the environmental policy itself, but because it applied retrospectively, meaning it impacted existing mining rights and contracts that were already approved.
Ah, I see. That changes things legally.
Exactly. It really highlights that deeply embedded tension between urgent environmental protection and the immediate pressures of economic development.
So when we consider all these environmental interactions, air, land, water, life, what does this all mean for the social sphere? How do these huge projects like mining impact communities and the very fabric of society, not just the physical landscape?
Large-scale developments often bring about profound social change. Sometimes dysfunctional change, especially when too much happens too quickly. Think about demography, population changes. A new mine can drastically increase net migration into an area. This often leads to rapid population shifts, which can be accompanied by undesirable social consequences, strain on services, social friction, that sort of thing.
Like a boomtown effect.
Exactly, the classic boomtown effect. We saw this vividly in Devalwal, a gold rush site in the Philippines. It transformed rapidly into an area plagued by armed conflicts and tragedies, with tens of thousands of illegal miners relying on it for their livelihood, creating huge instability.
That sounds chaotic.
It can be. Furthermore, mining has historically been a very male-dominated industry. This can introduce significant gender issues, both within the families of mine workers and in the adjacent communities. An influx of thousands of male mine workers can alter traditional family structures and social dynamics quite dramatically.
And how does culture fit into this complex picture? When outsiders with maybe different backgrounds and ways of life come into an area, what happens to local traditions, values, that sense of identity?
Mining projects inevitably interfere with local cultures. It's almost unavoidable. You get this influx of outsiders, often with very different cultural backgrounds, assumptions, and values. This can create what anthropologists call cultural shock, that deep disorientation you feel when your fundamental assumptions about the world are challenged.
Like everything changing at once.
Pretty much. And William Ogburn's concept of cultural lag is particularly relevant here. He argued that cultural lag occurs when a group's non-material culture, their values, beliefs, traditions, social norms, struggles to adapt at the same pace as rapid changes in their material culture. Think about the sudden introduction of large-scale industrial practices or an influx of new technologies and different lifestyles into a traditional community. Imagine a traditional agrarian community suddenly faced with shift work, industrial timelines, a cash-based economy replacing subsistence farming. That disjuncture, that gap, is a profound cultural lag.
It sounds incredibly disruptive.
It can be. However, maybe on a more positive note, these encounters also often spark a kind of mutual concern, a concern for finding harmony between technology and the natural environment. That dialogue is growing worldwide, fostering new collaborations sometimes.
Okay, moving towards the economics.
Yeah.
Mining inherently converts rock into wealth, so its relationship to the economic sphere seems pretty intuitive. But how do we truly measure this impact? And what are the hidden challenges in fully accounting for it?
Yeah, the economic link is obvious. We typically measure the size of an economy by its gross domestic product, or GDP, and a major mining project can dramatically change a local or regional economy. It can often dominate its GDP for maybe a quarter century or even more. We saw that with the Batu Hijau copper mine in Sumbawa, Indonesia, for example.
A huge local impact, then.
Absolutely. But here's a crucial point that often gets missed. GDP, by its very definition, excludes unrecorded economic activity. This includes really vital work like subsistence production farming for your own family, gathering resources, things like that, or even unpaid housework. These activities are absolutely essential for producing wealth and sustaining communities, but they simply don't show up in the formal economic numbers. So GDP gives us an incomplete picture.
That's a really important caveat. So this is where it gets really compelling for me. If nature provides so many vital benefits and services, clean air, fresh water, biodiversity, even just aesthetic beauty, why economic decisions so often seem to favor industrial development, like mining, over conservation? Is it simply because we don't put a neat dollar value on clean air or a thriving ecosystem?
That's a core economic challenge, yes, and economists often trace it back to something called market failure. Essentially, it's the failure of markets to reflect the full or true cost of goods or services.
Market failure. Oh,
Many environmental costs, like reduced water quality downstream, degraded landscapes, the loss of biodiversity, they're rarely included in the market price of, say, mined products. Why? Because these environmental values don't have readily available dollar figures attached to them. They're externalities.
right. They're outside the direct transaction.
Exactly. For instance, going back to Mount Isa, if that lead smelter's annual SO2 emissions were valued at the rate used in the U.S. trading system for pollution permits, it would add something like $200 million in annual operating costs. That's a huge hidden cost that the market wasn't accounting for directly in the price of lead.
200 million, that's staggering.
It is. And this is where concepts like willingness to pay, WTP, come in. That's how much people would theoretically pay for an environmental benefit, like cleaner air. And its counterpart, willingness to accept, WTA, how much compensation people would need for an environmental loss. Interestingly, studies often find WTA is higher, especially in developing countries, partly due to income constraints. People value what they have very highly.
WTP and WTA. Okay.
And then there's this broader idea of total economic value. This attempts to encompass both use values, things like the direct value of mineral exploitation, or indirect benefits like a forest filtering water, and also non-use values. These are trickier, like existence value, the value people place on simply knowing a resource exists, even if they never see it.
Like donating to save the black rhino.
Precisely. You donate because you value its existence. The profound challenge, though, is that those direct extractive use values are far easier to estimate and put a dollar figure on than the complex, often intangible, non-use values.
We're essentially undervaluing nature because many of its services are treated as free until they're irrevocably lost, and our scientific and economic understanding is still, maybe, limited in fully quantifying these intricate benefits.
That's a fair summary. And in a cruel twist, often individuals or communities who are actively preserving ecosystems for society's broader good find themselves economically penalized for it rather than rewarded.
That seems deeply unfair. Given all these complex interplays, natural, human, economic spheres, it's not surprising that environmental issues have rapidly gone global, leading to this growing body of international laws and agreements. How do these affect mining operations worldwide, which inherently cross borders?
You're absolutely right. The international dimension is huge. There are now well over 1,000 international treaties focused just on the environment. Now, while there isn't yet a single comprehensive international law specifically for mining, partly because states are, frankly, quite reluctant to surrender sovereign control over such a vital part of their economies.
Understandable from their perspective.
Sure, but many existing treaties do contain provisions that significantly regulate the industry, sometimes indirectly. For example, the 1972 World Heritage Convention. It explicitly provides for the preservation of outstanding natural sites by listing them as World Heritage. Any significant developments, definitely including mining, in or even adjacent to these areas are practically off-limits. It imposes a powerful global constraint.
Can you give an example of that in action?
Absolutely. Consider the Lawrence National Park in Indonesia. It's a World Heritage Site. Now, it was confirmed to have vast mineral potential, huge potential. But its development was explicitly stopped by the Indonesian government precisely because of its protected World Heritage status.
So the status trumped the potential wealth.
In that case, yes. Similarly, the controversial Windy Craggy Mine proposal up in Canada that was ultimately defeated when the region was listed as part of a World Heritage Site. And down in Australia, the Coronation Hill Mine proposal was turned down, partly due to the specific threat of cumulative environmental impacts on Kakadu National Park, which is World Heritage listed nearby.
So these aren't just symbolic agreements then, they have real teeth.
They absolutely can. They have tangible, real-world consequences for major projects.
Okay, so these international agreements, even if they don't directly name mining, can still act as incredibly powerful checks on development. They define boundaries that can transcend national economic interests. What about the mining industry's own response? How have they reacted to this increasing global environmental awareness and these growing legal frameworks?
Well, the mining industry has indeed responded proactively in many ways, primarily by establishing its own codes of practice and guidelines. Examples like Australia's Best Practice Environmental Management, or BPEM program, or the International Cyanide Management Code, which is very specific to gold mining.
Are these binding or just suggestions?
That's the key point. They're often voluntary frameworks, technically. However, they are increasingly becoming de facto international standards, expectations, really. And anti-mining advocacy groups, NGOs, they play a crucial role here. They are very effective at holding companies accountable to their own public pronouncements and commitments, which really helps elevate these guidelines from mere suggestions to something much closer to industry-wide expected practice.
Okay, so we've journeyed through these multifaceted definitions of our environment. We've seen how every sphere, from the air we breathe to the economy we rely on, is deeply interlinked. And we've explored the complex challenge of valuing nature against economic development. It's undeniably clear that environment is not just out there, is it? It's intrinsically interwoven with our human systems, our choices demanding a much more holistic understanding.
Absolutely. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, it becomes really evident that understanding these intricate relationships isn't just for experts or policymakers, it's for all of us, really, as we've seen throughout this discussion. Every decision, whether it's a global treaty or a local mine plan, creates ripple effects, ripples across all these environmental spheres, the natural, the social, the economic. And these influences don't just affect our planet today, but they shape our societies and economies for generations to come.
Which really leads us to a final thought, a question for you, our listener. Given that even areas we might think of as truly natural have likely been influenced by humans at some point in history, and knowing that the immense, often life-sustaining economic value of nature frequently goes unmeasured, unappreciated, until it's irrevocably lost, what responsibility do we as individuals and as a global society truly have in shaping the future of our shared environment? A responsibility that perhaps goes beyond just the traditional economic bottom line. Something to think about.